always need to know what the demand will be to improve investment decisions or the flexibility management. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting too because you could give recommendations for the backup technologies, conventional power or demand side management, and what is the main tools you can use to manage the flexibility and to serve the residual demand. So it's interesting. And the last one is coupling the two methodologies I mentioned before. So I have some comments or suggestions on your paper. The first one, I think your paper is too written as a chapter. So you perhaps should have to reorganize it. And I was wondering in which kind of valorization you could propose your paper. And I can conclude on it, but in my view, it is not on your methodology. Because I think there are literature on decomposition, on learning process, and so I'm not sure that your added value is on this methodology. But I think the added value is on the second point, the link between residual demand estimation and energy market issues. And so I think you have to focus on it to try to valorize your paper on this kind of a review or in this field. So, but as you wrote your paper, I'm not sure it is sufficient now. So I think you must add some paragraph, and I think in your paper you have all ideas to make this. You do not have so much work to achieve to the second solution. So I think you just have to add some paragraphs with the link, explaining the link between residual demand and energy issues. So I think this is your main task or your main work until the end of this year to try to valorize your paper. So I have some other suggestions or questions. First suggestions, I think this is interesting to continue to think about plausible scenarios you could make to have most accurate estimations of future generation mix impact on local market and on flexibility needed on local market. So I think this is one point you mentioned in your conclusion, but I think this is interesting to introduce it. If you could introduce a shock on a variable, you must see how your forecast will move, and so you could have some conclusion on it. So I think it's interesting. You said in your paper that electricity consumption variance is the main driver of residential demand variability. So I think I was wondering if you could not have some conclusion on the efficiency of demand-side management tools. Because if you have demand-side management tools, as demand response, as we all know it, you could perhaps internalize or reduce the uncertainty of demand. So I don't know, perhaps it could be interesting. Also, in your sensitive analysis, you said that photovoltaic generation has more impact on residual demand rather than, for example, wind power. So I was wondering if you introduce the opportunity for consumers to store some energies or some PV energies. So it could perhaps modify your residual load. So I assume you do not have excess generation in PV installation, But I think if one producer at 1 hour, he consumes part of this production, he store another part of this production, and it consumes it at another period. So in this other period, you could have a change in residual demand that will be not anticipated before. So it should be perhaps interesting. And the last comments, it's, I think in your conclusion, you make a lot of very interesting topics for future researches. And so I was wondering why you do not continue with your work here, the fields you mentioned in your conclusion. Because when you introduce plausible scenarios, the combination of energy experts' knowledge, and your model to explain and design plausible scenario, the addition of residual demand explanatory variables, so it could be interesting to continue in the same vein as you mentioned it in your conclusion. And to close my presentation, 3 remarks on the form of the paper. Always with the mind that to valorize your paper. So I think you must position better your paper in the literature you use. I think you have in your 1.3, your subsection 1.3, you have a literature review, and I think you must introduce this literature review in the subsection 1.5, considering that you use this literature and you will position your paper with this literature and your results in this literature. Because I assume that there are other existing studies that you could use to say, my model is better than this model. Okay? And so you could position perhaps with the use of the 2 indicators, the MAPE and RMSE indicators. You could use them and try to compare them to other studies. I think the section 2, in my view, must be reduced. The methodology section is too long, and the introduction is too long, I think. So I think you must focus on the point 2.3, proposed methodology, if you want to publish in an energy economic fields. Okay, I think so. And the last, my last comment, and I was wondering if you should not reorganize your paper with a more classic one. So because you have a long introduction, you have a long methodology part, and I think you should reduce these 2 parts. And with introduction, literature, methodology, applications, results, and explanations of the result. I think you will be, for you and for your paper, it should be a gain in clarity. So I think, and I repeat, I find your research very relevant and very accurate it's a very current research and a big field for future researches, so congratulations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Cédric. Maybe if I can answer quickly some of your comments. I do I agree with it's written as the PhD chapter, and maybe the introduction is way too long because it would be the introduction of the thesis work. So thank you for your advice on this. What can I say? Yeah, the use of the proposed methodology to build scenarios, it's actually what I want to do for now, and I had to, you know, navigate between many possible, because it's quite a large topic, flexibility, and we have many ways of treating it. So now I understand that I just maybe should try to build realistic scenario, hourly residual load scenarios. So it's quite straightforward to do. We can, for instance, increase the capacities, increase the capacity factor, introduce new uses, so modify the consumption patterns. This is the very first thing I am doing currently is to modify the capacities, mainly the capacities to study the potential patterns of variability of the residual load. What your comment about the PV storage is very interesting. The thing is that in this work it's very aggregated production, so I do not differentiate in the first paper between a large-scale producer, PV producer, and a residential producer, for instance. So this is very interesting, and so far I am quite. I have to do a lot of research to see what is the share, for instance, of residential producers in the Occitanie region, the Occitanie photovoltaic production. And also, I don't know if some storage devices are already introduced, or if it exists. Maybe we could find useful information of how it modifies the pattern of consumption. So yeah, this is a very interesting way of investigation. And also, yeah, to your comment about positioning the paper in the literature, that is very right. I would say the literature review I do in the chapter, it's very extensive. There are very a lot of papers talking about energy forecasting, and I mainly cite two literature reviews that the two of them they pass over. I think it's 480 papers or so about energy forecasting using data, time series data. So, and they are, you see, all these papers, they compare the other paper and the metrics. Generally, the root mean square error is the main metrics for comparison. And yeah, I should do this also in my paper, because I cite the review and I say, okay, they did the review, so you have to relate more to all of these papers. So once again, thank you very much, Cedric, for your comments. And if the audience has additional question, I'd be happy to answer.
I do have one question, but I think it's, well, I mean two, but I think they're pretty naive because it's not exactly my field. The first one is when you say that Occitanie is an independent unit, maybe you could have something to back it, like add some elements to back it up, because I'm sure it's correct to do this. But if you just have a general knowledge of the electricity system in France, to me, it seems like the whole thing is like one production system with mainly one producer, and then maybe on the local parts, you have some decision makers that are local, or this kind of things that you could like cite to back up the fact that you can study this as an independent network. Because it's, for instance, to me, when I think about an independent network, I would think about Texas, for instance, in the US grid, which is very different, very separate. So it cannot like be backed in case of a shortage. And so hence my second question, which would be like, is there any way you could put some meteorological data inside your model? Because I feel like most shocks would come from weather events. And so you could test maybe your model's responsiveness to various weather events in case, which I think is the main risk for like a isolated production system.
Thank you, Esther. I'm gonna start to answering the second question. The answer is yes. We can have, if it's the same format, time series, hourly time series of, let's say, temperature or wind speed or something. We can add this to the model. The thing, the corollary will be an extended computational time to train the model. So the more we add data, the more it's taking time. And actually, only with these three variables, but concatenated into a residual load, but then decomposed into 15 decomposition something. It takes generally 20 hours of training for the model, so it's quite long. And I'm very beginner in coding, so maybe there are ways to do it better, but it's quite long. And the second question, and I do agree with you, it's a very stylized choice, let's say, to say Occitanie is an independent, and this is a main, let's say, a main stake, a huge stake for the next chapter, because we want to also see how the flexibility can be managed through the exchanges within with the neighboring regions. The thing is that this is mainly motivated by the fact that the production, Occitanie is the second region in France in terms of variable renewables capacity. So this is mainly motivated by that, because the production is there is quite a lot of local production, and there is also a nuclear power plant in the region. So we have some kind of mini representation of what could be a future, let's say, national net electricity grid. But I agree, in reality, we can have electricity from, let's say, from England, for instance. So we cannot trace the electron, and it's quite a choice, and that's a good idea to maybe to support this, to add some additional elements to support this. Is there any?
Specificities of Occitanie, which are the structural characteristics, because this is important also when you say that your model can be applied to other, to any kind of electricity region or configuration. So it's useful also to give us more clarity on that.
So actually, in the paper, there's some writings about why Occitanie, why it's, and the main driver to choose Occitanie, it's because it's kind of pioneer in terms of renewables implementation. There is a huge potential for wind and also for PV. So with the calculation, you can we see that even now into 2021, the share of renewable production in the total generation, it's quite low, and even in Occitanie, which has once again the second largest capacities of renewable. And then why Occitanie? Because it's also interesting because it's interconnected to Spain. So you can also use this region, and you cannot do this with, for instance, Bretagne or so, because you have no interconnection. And also the very some time ago, in 2019, the Occitanie, they announced that they would put 140 million euros for a 5-year plan into hydrogen and power to gas. They want to investigate. So this was also a driver, because it's linking to the the local energy policies that are implemented. And actually Occitanie has this intention to become the first zero emission French region in the following decades. So these are the main drivers. And actually, I did some slight research also in the northern region, Région Nord. There is huge potential also here for wind power, and actually the variability of their residual load is even bigger than in Occitanie. So this could be also a very interesting region to study. I chose Occitanie mainly for the reason I just cited, but this could be applied obviously on other regions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Just one question about your model. In an electricity grid, you've got some suppliers which are fully flexible, like a gas plant or fuel plant. And you mentioned there is a nuclear plant. A nuclear plant has very limited flexibility. Would it be an improvement to your model if you would sketch this flexibility, this limited flexibility somewhere? You've got a base load, which you have to take into account in your grid, and that maybe you would limit your range of flexibility with the renewable energy suppliers.
Thank you very much for this comment, because it's actually what I came to the conclusion after working on the first chapter. Since we only have a residual load which is always positive, for instance, we can only analyze what is missing in terms of demand to cover, and not what demand we should, for instance, reduce to have a balanced frequency. So the thing is that in the next chapter, I'm going to change a little bit the residual load approach by adding the production from the nuclear plant and also from the hydro units, so we can have a residual load this time that encompasses better the decarbonized production, which is and it includes both some kind of baseload production with nuclear and hydro, and also variable production with the renewables. And this is becoming much more interesting because this time the residual load it goes negative sometimes. So we can analyze storage issues or selling to the neighboring regions or so. So thank you very much for your comment, because it's actually what I just started to investigate a few weeks ago. Okay, you said Ted and Mariano, is that? Ted and Mariano, I'll show you some results. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Definitely look at this paper. And usually the comparison, yeah, they are, because the paper, the forecasting paper, they compare, sometimes they compare a lot of various methods from econometry, from neural networks, etc. And I was, let's say, for me it was difficult to implement all these methods to do proper comparison, so I stick to only ARIMA versus the proposed methodology. But obviously it would gain more robustness, I would say, to compare with other existing methods, because there are plenty of... it's a way of comparing two forecasts. It's still with the ARIMA and the one you have produced, but it allows to quantitatively assess whether your assumption that one is better than the other holds is valid or not. So it's a way of enriching and completing the analysis. Okay, so definitely look into that. Thank you. Is there any other question? So thank you very much for your attention.